Major Breaking Bad spoilers ahead. Breaking Bad is one of the most well-known and critically acclaimed shows of all time. It's no secret that the show has garnered a massive viewer base over the past decade as it rose to the top of the charts in its prime, and especially when Netflix added all of the seasons to their streaming platform, allowing anyone to binge-watch all 62 of its episodes. I was one of those people. Back when the coronavirus shut everything down and everybody was staying at home, I tuned into the show every day and watched some of the best acting performances I've seen in my life. The show had countless iconic scenes, ranging from a legendary villain death to a monologue about quote-unquote being the danger. Among all of these scenes, one in particular stuck with me. I've rewatched the clip countless times, seen reactions of others watching it, and even made memes about it on my Breaking Bad meme account, link in the description below. Of course, I'm talking about the ending scene of Crawl Space, the 11th episode of the 4th season. This scene is brilliance. I couldn't even describe what I was feeling the first time I watched it, seeing Walt hysterically laugh while his wife looked at him with an expression of absolute fear. Before I get too deep with the details of the scene, I want to introduce the elements of a good scene, according to RachelPoley.com. The 5 elements are time and place, conflict and action, emotional change, a clear goal, and a page-turning ending. I'll go into detail with all of these as we explore them, and explain why each of these are done substantially with this scene in particular. To begin, I'll start with time and place. There are many jumps to different settings and situations in this episode, each of them providing a piece to the buildup of the final scene. At the beginning of Crawl Space, Gus, Mike, and Jesse rush into a medical building, where Gus later recovers from drinking the poisoned liquor from the previous episode. Shortly after, they depart, and Jesse states that he won't cook for Gus if Walt is killed. Gus isn't happy with his rebuttal, and states that it must be done. Later on, Walt is pressured to drive Hank to the laundry depot, as Hank claims that he thinks Gus may be the major distributor of meth that he had been looking for all this time. Knowing this, Walt erratically crashes his car as a sudden effort to keep the lab a secret, fearing that his family may be killed if the distribution is exposed. Meanwhile, Skyler has 2 henchmen threaten Ted, a man she slept with during all of Walt's absences in the previous seasons. She takes over $600,000 from Walt's stash of money and writes it into a check that would pay off Ted's company's tax fees. Her reasoning for this was actually pretty good, because if Ted wouldn't take this money to pay off the taxes, her name would be written all over the papers that she oversaw, and it would be a red flag for the IRS to investigate Walt and his family. However, Walt had no knowledge of any of this. Skyler had never mentioned it to Walt about transferring the money to Ted, as Walt had a steady source of income coming in and the money seemed minuscule to them, at least at the moment. Walt then returns to the lab, notices residue on some of the equipment, and finds out someone had cooked there when he left. Tyrus mentions how they wouldn't shut down the entire operation just for him, which makes Walt realize what was happening. Ensuing this, Walt begs Jesse, who had just returned from Mexico, to agree to not replace him, which would pretty much be his death warrant if he did so. Jesse pushes him back after saying that Walt didn't care when he needed help, quoting Walt saying,
"I hope you end up buried in a barrel in the Mexican desert."
Walt then turns around, is quite shocked, and then gets kidnapped, next shot depicting him in the middle of a desert with a sack over his head. Gus arrives and tells him that he and Hank will be killed, and if he tries to interfere with that, not only will they be killed, but his wife, son, and baby will all be murdered. His bounds are released, and they all drive off, leaving Walt in the desert. The next scene, a distraught Walt bursts into the office of Saul Goodman, frantically asking for someone mentioned in an earlier episode, someone who could make his family disappear with a whole new life, new socials, new IDs, and to never be found. Saul gives him the number, and Walt asks for one last favor of him. He begs Saul to call the DEA and give a tip that Gus has a hit out on Hank, believing that he doesn't deserve to die due to his actions. Saul agrees, but only if he doesn't mention Gus in the call. An hour time frame is given to Walt before the call is made, prompting his departure from Albuquerque. Walt leaves, and in the next scene, he bursts open his front door, scrambling to get into the crawl space of his house where the money had been stored, where this scene takes place. While the conflict here is quite obvious, some people don't know the extent of what really is at stake here. When Walt gets into the crawl space of his house, he expects the money that he had worked for to be kept down there, and to be put away, and for it to be a fallback should he ever need it. When he discovers that it's not all there, he turns to Skyler, who doesn't know a single thing about what's happening, and questions her about where the rest of the money is.
Skyler, where is the money?
I gave it to Ted.
What? You did what?
Walt, I had to. For us, for the family. I swear, Walt!
You gave our money to Pennick.
Walt! Please, please just hear me out, please!
After a brief silence, she says that she gave it to Ted. The money is gone. His family can't disappear, and the phone rings confirming that Saul had already made the call, and Gus would know that Walt tried to rat him out. Everything fell out of place, and he and his entire family was going to die. Everything that he did, all of the terrible actions he had committed up to that point, and justified for the purpose of providing for his family, was all for nothing. And to top it all off, the money was given to the man who fucked his wife. I think anybody who has seen this scene definitely knows that there's an emotional change, whether or not it fits the situation. Both characters in this scene change emotions drastically within the span of seconds. Walt goes from disbelief to fully enraged and filled with despair to screaming at the top of his lungs before having a hysterical, crazed laugh while he loses his mind. I've seen many comments about how Walter went into that hole and only Heisenberg crawled out, but I don't see it that way. I see it as Walt having a mental breakdown and quickly turning to laughing as he sees the irony of the situation. Not only was all of his money gone, and the idea of disappearing was out the window, but the money had been given away to someone who Skylar cheated on him with in the past. It's also a very real reaction in my opinion. When people are under extreme stress, or they're angered, they are often known to show inappropriate emotions to the situation, sometimes by curling their hands up, falling to the ground, or laughing maniacally. Given the situation, I find it plausible that this could occur if the situation really happened. It's even scarier when you realize that during Walt's mental breakdown, he believed in the moment that his entire family was going to be murdered. Skylar, on the other hand, goes from a concerned look to freezing up as Walt yells for the money, to absolutely helpless as she watches her husband plunge into insanity. Frozen in fear, she helplessly calls his name. Initially, she begs Walt to hear her out, speaking anxiously and not being able to put her words together, while Walt completely disregards her intentions and screams in distress. She crouches down and watches Walt slowly descend into madness, and you could see her lip quivering as she does so. Backing up, she hears Marie on the phone calling to tell them that Hank is a target of the cartel, to which she picks up the phone in tears and asks her what had happened, while Walt realizes it's too late to go back. The acting in this show was great, but the acting in this scene was phenomenal. Both of these actors add so much to this scene, providing an insight of how true panic feels. It impresses me how Bryan Cranston can go from playing an idiotic dad on Malcolm in the Middle to this. This scene was brilliantly crafted, the acting, the shots, the lighting, the symbolism, and the hopelessness. Not to mention the sinister soundtrack in the background that progresses in intensity as the scene plays out. According to RachelPulley.com, one of the 5 elements of a scene is the presentation of a clear goal. It gives the scene purpose and aids in character development, quoting, "It shows what sort of decisions they'll make and how they'll be under pressure in certain situations." The reason I put this element in this video is not because there is one, but because there is a complete lack of one. This is shown in the hopeless expression of both characters, but mainly in Walt's crazed laugh and his lack of words. He was a very careful man up to that point, always looking for his next move after something goes wrong and getting out of bad situations using his wits. But in this case, there was absolutely nothing he could think to do. He had already tried to reason with Gus, hoping that he'd keep him around, which failed. He then begged Jesse to agree not to replace him, which failed. He had one final idea to save himself and his family, leaving Albuquerque forever while trying to save Hank by letting him know that he was a target. But all of this also failed due to the terrible timing of both Walt and Skylar's problems. His plan B, C, and D had all failed, leaving him in a symbolic grave as the world around him literally melts away. The episode ends with the camera panning out on a broken Walt, while screeching music grows louder and louder until it cuts to black suddenly and silence ensues. The cinematography in the scene was genius. As the audience, we always anticipate what happens next, whether it's through foreshadowing, predicting what characters will do, or by simply watching on. It astonishes me that this episode wasn't the season finale, and if it was, it would have sucked for those who watched it live. The fact that the writers could craft this benchmark of an episode without even putting this as the finale to the season baffles me. Not to mention that Cranston was also a producer on this episode. After watching Crawlspace, I immediately started watching the next episode. There was no way in hell I'd stop watching right there after seeing the episode end like that. And I'm sure I wasn't the only one, which says something about this episode. It's a page-turning ending, which means that it makes the audience want to keep reading on or watching the next episode. Vince Gilligan consistently crafted the episodes of Breaking Bad to be like this, making the audience eagerly wait each week for a new episode, at least until Netflix allowed people to watch them back to back. Can you imagine watching this ending and having to wait a week to see a follow-up to it? Regardless, the ending to this episode had everything leading up to this. Everything Walt had done for his family, all of his moral shortcomings, everything was worthless now. And we, as the audience, desperately wanted to see what was next, making this scene a benchmark for those ahead. The writers crafted this beautifully. At the beginning of the video, I stated that Breaking Bad has had a multitude of great scenes over the course of its 5 seasons, with a broad spectrum of conflicts and settings. Scenes like Gale's death and Combo's death portray shock and reality, while scenes like Walt demanding others to stay out of his drug territory depict a man developing a power complex. But nothing in the show is quite like the ending scene of Crawlspace. It's truly unique, and nothing in the show is similar to it. It is the best scene I've ever watched in a television show. Thanks for watching. Be sure to subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and leave a like if you did, and leave a dislike if you didn't. This is my first video essay, so leave feedback in the comments if you desire to. Thanks once again for watching, and have an A1 day.